Joanna Greenfield dreamed of traveling to East Africa to study one of the last known populations of wild chimpanzees. When she was offered a once-in-a-lifetime chance, the young student set off from peaceful Kenya into politically hazardous Uganda. From there, a small team of guides led her into the mountains. She tells the story of what happened in the new book, The Lion's Eye, a true story of her burning mission to connect with animals. It's also an adventure story and an against-the-odds quest for a wilderness few of us have ever glimpsed. It is a great pleasure to welcome Joanna Greenfield to the Roundtable. Thank you so much for being with us. A great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Joe. It's a tremendous pleasure.
So tell me about this burning mission. It seems like this was something that had really been in you for a long time. So at what point do you think that it can become reality?
I really didn't. Even when I was finally in the rainforest with the chimpanzees, it was hard to believe that it was real.
So what gets you to that point in the sense of the mission? What was it that you wanted to... Let's talk about dream, and then we'll talk about reality. But the dream for you was to do what?
Well, as a very young child, I had always been fascinated with animals, and I had crawled toward them as if toward an altar. And they ran from me because I was staring at them, and that's a threat to animals. And they would scream and run to other people for help. But somehow I always knew that Africa was a place that I could go to where I could look at animals and be ignored.
You went to Kenya, and I'm interested in then how did you get that opportunity to go there as a student?
Well, I was about to do an internship with Coco the signing gorilla in California, and at the last minute, I wanted to go to Africa so badly, and I was so afraid that if I waited another year, I would be tempted into working for an investment bank or something like that, and I would lose it. So I took a semester of wildlife biology in Kenya, studying giraffes at a research site, and from there I knocked on every door in Kenya, every single secretary, every single wildlife researcher, every single scientist, and I finally found out there was a scientist wandering around downtown in Nairobi asking random backpackers if they would come and study chimpanzees at his gorilla research site. And one of the backpackers sent him to me.
What was he studying?
He was studying everything about the gorillas, really. It was one of the few populations that are left of the mountain gorillas. And he was interested in studying chimpanzees to see how much they overlapped with the gorillas. And as it turned out, that wasn't possible to study because the chimpanzees moved so fast through the canopy and the undergrowth was so thick on the bottom that we really couldn't run after them. We were lucky if we could stagger. And I ended up just sitting at a fig tree and waiting for them to show up.
So this is in Uganda?
That was in Uganda, in the impenetrable forest in the last of the mountains of the moon.
Give us an idea of how large that spot is. I mean, how big are we talking?
It's enormous. When you stand at the top of the highest of the last of the mountains of the moon and you look out over the foothills, you can see all the way to the end of the continent, really. Or you could at the time. That was 20 years ago. But I've looked at Google Maps since then, and it's still pretty wild.
But the point is that this is really one of the last places on Earth where you can see what you saw.
Yes.
So to take on that, to do that, you have to be emotionally ready, you have to be physically ready. There are all kinds of things that you have to do, I assume scientifically ready, to be able to take on a burden or a task like that. So what was that process like for you?
I'd have to say on every one of those levels, I was completely unprepared. In fact, probably much more so than any average person.
Well, good, because it makes for a better book. You get to write about those stories. Much better when you're prepared, just go and do it and leave.
Yes. In fact, somebody came up to me and said she was giving my book to her 12-year-old granddaughter, and she said, because if you can do it, anyone can do it. And I want her to have that lesson. But I didn't have depth perception, and I had gone through my whole life tripping into things, falling into walls, and running the slowest mile in the history of my school. And nobody thought that I was going to be able to go to Africa and do a research site, but I turned out to be perfectly suited because I was completely happy to sit for 8 hours in the rain at a fig tree and hope I saw a chimpanzee for 2 minutes in that week.
What was it like when you saw the first one?
Oh, it was incredible. It's It's hard to explain that feeling that that's what humans should be like in a way, because they live with so much passion. But I saw them at a very rare moment. They were having a mating group. All of the chimpanzees got together to be very excited about an older female who was in heat, and they were dancing around anyway. But then when the thunderstorm started and then they saw me, they combined 3 different kinds of war dances that they do. They were circling around me, and they were throwing things down, and it was incredibly beautiful.
Were you ready for that aspect? I mean, that they would see you. Did you feel threatened at all by that they're throwing things down around you?
No. No, I had worked with a couple of monkey species before that, and if you stare at something long enough, almost any animal will either run away or bite you or throw something at you. And I was staring, so I was very used to getting bitten and having things thrown at me. No, I was never afraid of the chimpanzees, ever. I could see that they were just really mischievous and curious and testing me. But the Bachiga tribesmen that I worked with had been told by the Batwa pygmies that the chimpanzees will chase you and tie you to a tree and beat you to death with branches. So they were deeply terrified of the chimpanzees. And I think the chimpanzees had met them before and knew that the Bachiga were terrified of them, so it was much more fun for them to try to goad us.
Why do you think they were told that? Is that just a way of trying to keep people away?
Yes, the Batwa were very peaceful people and very knowledgeable about the rainforest, and the Bachiga had come down with the Bantu migration from more desert-like lands and didn't really understand the rainforest. And they were very vicious to the Batwa pygmies, and so the pygmies told them all sorts of stories to keep them out of the rainforest, and that was one of them.
What kind of crew did you have? How many people were with you when you were in the rainforest?
I had 4 Bachiga tribesmen, one of whom was almost a game guard, when 2 of them were in training to be game guards and later did become game guards, which was a wonderful thing to be in that area. There were very few jobs. And I had a Mutwa pygmy tracker.
What does a tracker do? What does a game guard do?
The game guards were really supposed to be looking for lumber poachers, because there were a lot of people in that area the rich people would come in with trucks and they would take down the beautiful old growth trees and take them over to Zaire or Rwanda and sell them for quite a bit of money. But they would leave total devastation in their wake. As it turned out, there really wasn't anybody in that part of the rainforest. They were more there to help me find the chimpanzees. The Mutwa tracker was the one who always found them.
You write in the book that eventually it became too dangerous for you to do the research that you were doing. How long into your mission did that become evident?
Fortunately, right after the last time I saw the chimpanzees, there was a crippled female, and she almost clung to me on that last day. She let me spend 6 hours watching her play with her older son and her baby, and she didn't seem afraid of me at all. I was trying very hard not to stare intently at her, but she ended up making her nest for the night right over my head, which was a tremendous gift. And I felt, even though I didn't think I had enough data to have finished my thesis, I felt like something that happened that day was the culmination of everything that I had gone to Africa for. I didn't see them for another 2 weeks, and then I got a letter saying my visa had been retroactively revoked, and I was going to be arrested at the border if I didn't get out in time.
The reason for that being?
We'd never known for sure, but they did it to all the volunteers in the country at the time, so I think some researcher had irritated someone in the government.
Were you able to come to some conclusion even though your work was not complete?
I was, as it turned out. My thesis reader was very impressed that I had 100 hours worth of data on the 4 monkeys and the chimpanzees together, and I had more than enough to do statistical analyses of the different amounts of foods that they were eating. They were all trying to eat the figs because they were the richest, most delicious of all of the fruits. And I was able to show that there was a dominance hierarchy. The animals that got the figs the most were the chimpanzees, and the ones who got them the least were the little tiny red-tailed monkeys who were afraid of everybody.
How does something like that change you? I can't imagine spending that much time with another species and being and watching and observing and